When you want to create drums in Bitwig Studio, you usually start by selecting some kind of VST or drum sampler, and we use here the drum machine of Bitwig Studio, and we are gonna use here some kind of random drum set, and I'm gonna go for something acoustic here. And then you usually start to create some sequences by creating a note clip and then drawing something in. But we are here on the polarity channel, so we don't use the piano roll at all. We use the note grid. So we switch this here at first to the piano view, right? Instead of this drum view here, use the piano roll and we paint in just one note. And we use this note actually not to trigger something inside of the sampler. We use that to activate or enable the note grid. So we create your note grid in front of the drum machine. So in here, we just select voices mono, voice stacking is off at the moment, note through is disabled, control through, audio through is on, device phase length is 1. These are my init settings. Free run when stopped is also enabled. You can disable this if you want to, but it's enabled at the moment. So in here, we don't need to actually use the note inputs. And what we want to do is we want to create here a select in front of the gate out, and we use gate in. So every time there's a note coming into the note grid, right? We select it at the second input. So when I hit play here, I actually have to hit play here on this clip. So every time you hit play and there's a note coming in, which is the case because we have here one note in there, right? We selected the second input. So that's all. Then we create here a trigger module or triggers module. We go to the second input. And then we select here a base note of C1 because drum samplers usually, or drum machines usually start with C1, with the note C1, and then everything is above. So with this, we trigger here the kick drum 4 times in 1 bar, which is nice. And when we hit stop, nothing is triggered here because there's no note playing at the moment. Okay, so we go down to 1. And we leave it exactly at this position. So now we want to trigger not only the kick drum, we also want to trigger all the other samples in here. And you probably already guessed it, we want to use note stacking or voice stacking for this. Sometimes I call it note stacking for some reason, but it's actually voice stacking. And we use here, let's say 10 voices. So we want to trigger 10 samples in here. And for that, we use here the voice stack modulator called stack spread. And we switch this here to value. And then we modulate here this by exactly 1 semitone. Which means voice 1 is 0 times C1. So we have C1 with voice 1. Voice 2 is C sharp 1. Voice 3 is then D. Voice 4 is D sharp, and so on. So we basically go up for each voice with 1 semitone to the next note. So now we trigger here probably with this setting here, all these samples or 10 samples, right? Because we have 10 voices, each voice has a different pitch setting here, and this one is the same for all these voices. So we want to change now these triggers here for each voice differently, and we are gonna use here a step modulator for that. And we switch here the step modulator to 10 steps because we have 10 voices. So we have 10 bars here, and we switch this to hold rate of 0, and then we modulate here the phase modulation by exactly 10%. 0.1, 10%, and we switch here the step modulator to per voice. So now everything is white, which means we basically step up for each voice with 10% on the phase modulation value here. So each bar is basically 1 voice. when we go here to the node grid itself and bring down the voice stacking to maybe 9, you can see it just also go down here with the bars. But we want to modulate actually 10 samples. So with this step modulator here, we can now modulate here this triggers value by, let's say, 15. Because we have already 1, and 1 plus 15 is 16 notes, which makes sense. So now we can draw in here actually how many triggers we want for each voice. So we want to have here the kick drum trigger a lot. It sounds pretty chaotic, but it kind of works. So what we want to do now is that when the slider's here at 0, we don't want to actually trigger something. So we bring in here a value, and we bring in some logic bigger than this one here. So when this value is bigger than 0, then give out a trigger, right? So we modulate here the value with also with the step modulator output, which means when this slider here is at 0, actually there's no trigger here. When there's something slightly above 0, you can see we get a trigger here, right? So now we combine this with an end comparison module here and say when there's a node inside of the node clip, this one, when this one is true, okay, when there's a node inside of the node clip and the value is above 0, then actually switch to the second input and then use triggers here to trigger something. So now when I hit play, nothing happens because everything is at 0. So now I can start here and bring in the kick drum. And back to normal, right? So this is basically now some kind of Euclidean drum sequencer, if you want to call it this way. Let's call this here tricks, and this one is called triggers. So now we just duplicate this one here and call this velocity, because we want to change the velocity for each step. At the moment, everything has the same velocity, each sample here. So we bring this velocity down to 0 and modulate here with the with this step mod actually here the velocity. So now we can say the kick drum here has the most velocity, right? It's the loudest one. The snare drum is not so loud, and the hi-hats are also a bit quieter. Velocity is 0. Actually, velocity 0 is actually not completely quiet, looks like. But it's better than before. You can maybe also use here the gain for that if you want to, but I'm just leaving it here with the velocity setting. So we can change the velocity. We can also say we want to use, let's say, a divider, not a dice, divider, clock divide. So this one basically in this position gives out the same result as before. Everything is triggered, but when you move this up to 2, actually only every second trigger is triggered. So it sounds like this. Let's bring up the velocity here. So now we use here a third one and call this divider. So this one divides now our triggers. Let's go up to 5 here maybe. I think that's enough. So this sounds like this. We have a kick drum. It's triggered all the time, right? So now we bring up the divider. So this is, I think, 3. So every third trigger is only getting through here. and then divider here. Okay, so this is one possibility. You can also bring in a clock quantizer here and quantize everything to a 16-node grid. Put the triggers here. And then it's more musical this way, kinda. So every second snare is only played here. So you can create grooves this way, kinda. So another idea would be to actually bend the phase signal here in certain ways. So we use a phase input here. And then we can use a shift module, which basically makes it possible to actually shift certain notes around. So I show you this here for a moment on the piano roll so you can see what's actually going on. So I create here another instrument track and just record what's coming out of the note grid, right? Note grid output, so just record it here. So you can see inside of the note grid here, you have the kick drum down here. And when I modulate the shift, this shift value here, what happens is actually that we take the whole part here, this whole sequence, and just shift it to the right or to the left. The same sequence is just shifted to the left or to the right. So this is the idea behind, right? So we can do this here by just modulating the shift with another module. Let's go to 100%. And then switch this here to bipolar mode because we want to offset it to the right side or to the left side. So we can do this here with the kick drum or maybe with the snare drum. Let's listen to this. Let's call it actually here shift. Maybe I should record this here. Yeah, it looks like this. Yeah, so shift is also possible. You can implement something like bend, and then kind of bend the whole sequence, and maybe also use this here for the clock signal. So it sounds like this. So this is basically all samples at once, but you can, of course, do the same thing here with this step modulator and call this bend, and then only do it for certain samples. Modulate this here by 50%. Yes. Then only do this for the kick drum, maybe. So you can hear it here in the kick drum. So right, it starts basically slow and then it gets faster. So this is what you can do with bend. Then you can do it only for the kick drum or only for the snares or only for the hi-hats and create kind of grooves with that. You also don't need to use your actually triggers or the clock signal for that. So you can leave this out and then only bend basically the input signal going into the clock quantizer. So it has a different effect. Let's try it out. So it sounds more musical because you always quantize to a 16-note grid. It gives you a bit of different groove for the kick drum. So let's hit randomize. It's also interesting that you can use just randomize here on these step mods and you get a different groove. Right, it's basically a groove machine. So you can hit randomize everywhere, and then you can also just save this then as a preset, and it stays persistent because it's a step mod, which is interesting. And you can save yourself then, or explore some grooves, and then just save this groove as a preset, and then record it later for something you want to use. So that's that. We influenced here the velocity, we influenced shift, we influenced divider, bend, velocity, triggers. So we can do a lot of things with that. Also, if you think these triggers are too short, you can see here, when we record this actually, these triggers here are exactly 160 note long, right? Because the clock is actually 16 notes. So every note in there is exactly 160 note long. And you want to kind of pull this more together. You can use inside of this note grid here, you can use a length module to actually shorten the gate signals to make it very short. And then use a knot and make it longer. So it looks like this now. Something like this, right? So you have one note on the other note. So you fill in the gaps basically if you want to do that. It's maybe probably not that interesting, but you can do it. So in here, we just remove this again. So instead of the drum machine, we can also use, of course, here, let's say addictive drums, or we can use XO. XO is also a drum sampler, which starts with C1 here at the beginning with the kick drum. So it works from the get-go. Let's use some different triggers. And then use different samples. Right, so you can just use some random drum VST and it works exactly the same. We can also do stuff like, you remember here the phase, right? The phase is exactly 1 bar long. So we can say everything in here double time if you want to. So we do like, let's say select here and select this different input and say note, what's the name? C#1, and then C#1 gives us here actually this one, and the second one is just multiply and yeah, constant of 2. So this one should give us basically the same as before, but we can say we want to actually double time here everything. Actually make this a bit longer. Double content. Oh, we need C1, all channels. Oh, I see. It's not C1, it's C3, C#3. This one, yeah. So when we get basically this note here, you would double time basically everything that triggers in here. You can also say 3 times or 4 times. Right, so you can increase the speed or the tempo of the sequence pretty easily with this. Also, an idea would be to use a chance module. Go to 0% and then duplicate this here. Call this one chance. And you can decide every sample is triggered all the time, and then you can say the upper samples here only sometimes. So there's a kind of probability here involved. Maybe exchange the samples here for a moment. Okay, so this is some ideas I had for that. You can save this as a preset, recall it, like I said. Maybe I put this here in the description below so you can just download it. It's actually very simple. It's not that complicated. You basically start simple with a simple idea that I showed you in the beginning, and then you add to it and you bring in more modifications and so on. And then you have here this nice interface with these step mods, and you can influence everything. And you can also just hit randomize and get random grooves this way, which is kind of interesting maybe sometimes. So instead of using XO here, we can also use my auto slicer thing here, which I created in some of my recent videos. I think it was 3 videos ago, I'm not sure. So there's a sample in here. We can scan the sample and select certain slices of that. And this one triggers actually beginning at C3, not C1. Maybe I should change this. But you can easily just go up here to C3 and then just trigger here the auto slicer. Or we actually need to increase here the chance, of course. So let's hit play. So you can kind of fake the functionality of live by XLN audio. We can maybe also here sample something. Use here the quick sampler. Just play something. Something like this. And put this here into the slicer. And scan it. Let's hit play. It's maybe too many voice tags here. Let's go to 5. So you can also recreate kind of some features of live with that if you want to. And the best thing, it's completely you know, autark from all the other things. We can just create your node grid and then put this node grid in front of all kinds of different drum samplers or drum VSTs or whatever you want to use to trigger something. Okay, so this is my idea here for a simple drum sequencer or Euclidean random drum sequencer for Bitwig Studio. I put here, like I said, I put this in the description below so you can just download the preset for Bitwig Studio 5.1. And that's it. Leave a like if you liked the video. Leave me some questions in the comments below. Subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.